Mhm.
Oh, dear friends, dear colleagues, thank you very much for joining our event today. It's a joint event of the Institute for Economic Research and Policy Consulting and Fundacja Liberté from Poland. And we will talk today about Ukraine, EU integration, and the wartime. And I'm very happy to represent our moderator, Magdalena Baran, and I pass the floor to her.
Okay, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm really happy to be here and to moderate this public debate discussion about the Ukraine's EU integration in wartime. I will make a short introduction in a minute, but first I would like to ask Olga Kwasiuk to say a few words about the project and about our today discussion first.
Hello. Thank you for giving me the floor today for the International Renaissance Foundation, which I represent here. It is very important that the initiative that we have launched 4 years ago in cooperation with key Ukrainian think tanks is developing and becoming more comprehensive now. And it is very important to have an analysis of implementation of economic part of the association agreement and Ukraine's integration into the common EU market. We know that now Ukraine faced huge challenges because of Russia's war in Ukraine, but at the same time, we received candidate status a year ago. So it also gave a new meaning to the association agreement implementation, and it is very important to analyze and to summarize the results of the economic integration of Ukraine and the EU during the previous year, and now to discuss the challenges and priorities for cooperation for the next period. And it is very pleasant and crucial that we have experts, peers from the EU countries here, because we also need to provide arguments what that Ukraine's accession, what it means to the EU member states, and that it is this process is beneficial for both sides. So I hope we will receive a lot of information today, and thank you. Productive discussion for us.
Okay, thank you, Olga. When I was preparing to this discussion, I simply realized that it's already 15 months of the war in Ukraine, and it is today. So we all experience war, not only through media, not only through the reports, relations of the war reporters, not only at the level of political or economical analysis. For several generations, in fact, of Europeans, war has never been so close, so real, so tangible. Because if from our, European perspective, from the perspective what I discuss with my friends from Austria, Germany, Portugal, Spain. Okay, it doesn't happen directly in our home, but just at the door of our home, at the door of just behind the door of Europe, of European Union, just behind the border of NATO. And this is also our case, our war. This war we experienced through our friends, through our colleagues, through people we work with, but also through the millions of people who are forced to leave their homes, to seek shelter, to escape from war. The war in Ukraine very quickly verified existing alliances, put international organizations such as NATO, United Nations, International Court of Justice, International Criminal Court, and finally European Union, I would say, on their feet. We had to start to speak for our friends, but we also had to start to make decisions and to take more actions to help our friends. But also we had to think about ourselves at a very, very new perspective. The war, this war, forced the European Union to confront first the values we all know from the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, such as dignity, freedom, equality, solidarity, and finally subsidiarity. The solidarity of Europe and further the solidarity of the Western world turned out to be stronger than many people might even expect. The event of war, of course, it's somehow referring to our past or history, but an event of war, in fact, forces us to plan not only for today and tomorrow, but to make this long-term planning, to plan this also what I call the post-war, not only for Ukraine as such, not only post-war in the term of the Ukrainian-Russian relations, but also post-war for the whole Europe, and in the longer perspective, also the post-war for the whole world. Because here, post-war means in the first war, the question, not if, but when, and of course, what we all know, under what conditions we will make a step into a deeper integration. And since we all know that since June 2022 was this turning point, and Ukraine received the status of the candidate country. And it was the moment of when we started to think about much deeper integration. And of course, it is, when we think of war, it is also a question about relations between EU and Ukraine, both during the war and post-war scenarios. This is the topic of our today's discussion, of course. So before I will give the floor, just a few more questions I had in my mind. Of course, what are the dimensions of this integration? What paths, paradoxically, does war open up? What has Europe learned about itself and about our neighbors, about our friends, in the moment when we face the war? And maybe if the renewal of values, or a chance, if there is not only this renewal of values, but also a chance to establish much better and much deeper cooperation. From one side, this integration in wartime seems to be obvious, but the question is, of course, Olga mentioned about the challenges and the priorities, about that this integration must be beneficial for both sides. My question is always, what is the next step? And I usually ask this question to my readers, to my students, to my colleagues at academia and in media. Today, we will see what is the next step, thanks to two presentations. So our today's speakers will share with us knowledge about the integration within the association and beyond. So first, Veronica, if I remember correctly, the floor is yours. This will be the first. Oh, I'm sorry. This will be our first presentation, and then we'll give the floor to Irina. So, Veronica, please.
Dear Magdalena, first of all, thank you very much for such a broad place in our discussion in such a broad and extremely important frame, which will define our future for years and our, I hope, joint European future. Ukraine feels that we are always a part of Europe's, we are still at the door of the European Union, but the war actually helped us to open this door a bit wider than it was before. I will talk today, and I hope that by now you see the presentation about the results of the project kindly funded by International Renaissance Foundation, as Olga already said. This is a project called Ukraine's integration in the EU internal market, progress under association agreement and new opportunities. Actually, we planned this project just before the full-scale aggression. So initially, the idea was to focus how to ensure integration in the EU market without being a candidate country, without having this integration perspective. That was a challenge we were fighting for years. And that was the task we initially prepared. However, thanks to the triggers of some geopolitical changes of these provoked by this horrible war, we added another dimension. So we added integration beyond association in terms how the association agreement and how the integration tools that we had before interlink with the accession process itself. Basically, then we are talking about European integration, and then I was preparing for this talk and trying to understand how to frame it wider, how to make it more like interesting, not for Ukrainian internal discussions, but for the European discussions and the discussions within the EU, because that is the major part. It's important that not only Ukraine prepares and thinks and does homework, whatever, that EU itself thinks, prepares. I understand that actually the integration was Ukrainian integration, Ukrainian story of the integration was much longer than probably European preparations for that. Because integration definitely didn't start in June 22, but it even did not start in 2014, then the association agreement was signed. It probably, and I hope the colleagues will help, but my assessment that the serious talks about integration and like as a strategic goal for Ukraine started at latest in early 2000s, as soon as Ukraine was out of these transformation crisis. And this integration was always been like multi-layer, multi-venue, and very interconnected process, because partially Ukraine was doing unilateral approximation to EU legislation. Definitely was no verification. It was not like one-to-one transposition, but Ukraine then changing its legislation was trying to look at the EU examples, how EU solved that. We were not using United States, Chinese, sometimes in lazy situations with some Russian things, but in principle, when we were serious, EU legislation was always the objection. The object of our like intention, where we aim. And on the other side, the EU was giving Ukraine unilateral preferential market access, and we still have that. And one of the latest discussions that we have with our neighbors is partially about these unilateral measures. There always was a sectoral integration in energy community, in common aviation space. It was actually the ACA that visa-free for industrial products that is actively discussed over the last years in Ukraine. Actually, the first intention were signed in 2003 or 2005 between then yet Kuchma and the European Union. So basically the sectoral integration was always there and happened. Plus, it was the alignment with EU internal policies like the EU Green Deal. You cannot join that because it's not a treaty, but you can align. And that's what Ukraine has been doing for these and for other occasions. And definitely we have we had these association agreement, the major masterpiece with enormous legislative list. It's definitely not the accession list, but it's large and important, and that we will talk about that a bit later. But before that, I just want to say that now with the candidate status, we got a tectonic shift. I even call it from never-ending story to clarity. Because why these candidate status so important for Ukraine, and I believe also for the European Union. First, for the first time since the development of Ukraine as independent country, EU and Ukraine formal ambitions and expectations coincided. Ukraine has for a long time was talking that EU is our strategic objective. We want to join, and the EU is saying a lot of things, but basically yes in principle, but no now. Do not talk about that. Do not apply. It's not. It will be forwards. Now we have the coincidence of formal understanding of our positions, and second, it's more important, it's also very important, it provides a political clarity for the process. We are not in the process of integration, which is just going on and on and on. We have a clear, unambiguous, understandable goal for all stakeholders. And then, if we have the goal, we can build plans, we can verify our progress, we can be on the same page because we started we have the end goal is the same thing. The process is still not fully smart. People who are doing this project management understand me. Smart goal means it's specific, yes, measurable for sure, achievable. Ukraine will do everything. Relevant, yes, for Ukraine, also for EU. Time bound. And here we have a problem. It's not time bound. And the discussion about time boundness is going a bit crazy because everybody thinks short term, medium term, long term is very different definitions in each heart and mind. And this is a problem because if the process is time unbound, we can get in different kinds of the traps, political traps, fatigue traps. We have a Balkan trap in the UK, so the countries there much smaller than Ukraine, with much more precarious by now legal alignments, still waiting at the same doors, looking at them being open, but still with no further step, just standing in the front of the open. So that's why it's important to talk about not only accession process. It's not about this path as unique only instrument that we have, and from now on we start moving on. It's important to understand that accession track is a part of this multi-layer integration process. It is overarching. It's definitely most important because it has the very clear end goal, but it has to be supplemented, accompanied by other processes. First of all, the association agreement. And that's why we always have to balance all the different fruits. Not to have the fatigue gaps, or Balkan gaps, or any other gaps and pitfalls that we might see on our way. Then we are talking about questions to be addressed, and I will try to address some of them. It's definitely more there. Magdalena already put some of them. But what are the questions I saw? How far the existing integration paths allow Ukraine to enter EU markets and institutions? And we will talk more about markets, principal economy, but we'll be happy to answer also some questions about institutions if we can. What does the existing framework interrelate with accession? What the existing frameworks brought to Ukraine? What can be still achieved without existing frameworks? And if we achieve that, how far Ukraine will be from the end goal, from the accession? Definitely what happened in 2022, the war, how Ukraine managed to cope with the challenges or did not manage, what new challenges emerged. What the sectors that are most prospective for fast-track accession, and here I will rely deeply on Irina Kase, my colleague, to discuss some of them, and also what stakeholders do to facilitate the process. And we will try to answer these, and most of these questions with the economic integration prospect within the association agreement and relevant sectoral agreements associated with association agreement, because some of them are mentioned there. If you look at the economic part of association agreement, I call it economic part because it's two major chapters. It's a trade and trade-related matters, and it's economic and sectoral cooperation that are relevant. We can tentatively divide the old text there into three parts. One is the direct action agreements, primarily liberalizing market access. Countries committed to reduce import duties or put them zero within 7 years. Very clear. No, the policy and politicians can intervene in principle, but largely it's a clear threat. Then we have the sectoral integration arrangements that are based on the if-then principle. That is, Ukraine does some legal alignment, EU checks that, and if everything is okay, we are getting mutual opening or some like integration into the EU market. It somehow resembles the accession, but not exactly, because the price is here. It also has smaller but clear end goals. You do the alignment in customs sphere, you get the membership in the European Common Transit System. Clear, completed. It's not in the accession process. We have that as a like end game. Here we have fruits on the road, and it's very important to have fruits on the road. And there are also arrangements like designed to ensure level playing field, to ensure fair competition for Ukrainian and European companies on the market that is like formed jointly. These arrangements had no fruits on the road or within the association, but these arrangements have fruits on the road of the accession. Competition policy, intellectual property rights protection, consumer price protection, you name it. It's many things that we will see as bearing fruits, not only for better environment, business environment in Ukraine, but also for the path of the integration. But today we will focus on the second one, on this if-then principle, because we need to narrow, and that is where we have this value added, and this is a fifth edition, trying to understand how far we are still from the EU internal market. There are actually 15 spheres that we identified within the association agreement, within economic integration, that allow these deeper integration, actually through very different tools. It can be internal market treatment, that is for several sectors like financial services, like postal, like telecom, like maritime. It can be some recognition of equivalence or ACA, Agreement on Conformity Assessment and Acceptance of Industrial Products. In both cases, it's actually a type of mutual recognition. It can be mutual market opening for public procurement, or it can be separate treaties, as we have definite or as an option for transport. But all of that gives eventually the integration in the EU market before, in parallel, despite accession process. How far these, and this is a new thing that we try to understand, then it exercise became to make sense, how sufficient this integration for the entire accession. But because definitely if you have the agreement, ACA agreement for sectors covered, we are in the market. But how many sectors are not in the association agreement and those are not covered? And it's a lot of them. Mostly all what is not under the new approach and a bit of some of the new approach technical regulation. However, for example, for SPS, for food safety, most of legislation is there. So as soon as Ukraine aligns fully its legislation and EU confirms that, so basically we are getting recognition of equivalences like a stamp on that, we are done with this sphere. Also, as far as we read from the agreement, Ukraine will get internal market treatment. So the Ukrainian companies will be treated as if European companies for the purpose of the market for 4 sectors: financial, telecommunication, postal courier, and international maritime transportation. So as soon as we are done, we are in. We are done with this small part of the accession. And also there are several sectors a part of SPS in which we are also almost completely we are done. That is public procurement. And this is energy sector where Ukraine has already progressed a lot. For the rest, this sectoral integration will give the integration within the part, but it's not enough to say that the whole spectrum of legislation and institutions needed for accession are covered. But still, not bad. And this is only a part of the sectoral integration. We did not analyze the second part of association. But the major question, and what did Ukraine do? I did not show here the deadlines because they're actually almost all done, passed. We are still behind. We are behind the schedule, and we probably, and we cannot now catch up immediately. But what is important, Ukraine did a lot. And despite the war, we progressed. And if we look at that, most of the decisions was 20, 21, 22, it means that was a cumulative effect. It was not like in the agreement that was planned, okay, it will be done in a year or 2 and everybody will do that. No, it took a time for Ukraine to adapt and to EU to verify and then to prepare the decision. The war did not stop that. The war somehow even fostered the understanding of urgency in Ukraine, but also in the EU. So what we have now, in SPS, we have recognition of equivalence for cereal seeds, which is great, but frankly, it's a tiny, tiny part of the Ukrainian agri-food exports to the EU. It's not even for cereals per se, it's only cereal seeds, it's for sowing. So a lot to do. Customs, it was planned to join a common transit system at least a couple of years ago. It was announced that it will happen 2022, and it happened 2022, despite the war and despite the huge pressure on customs, because this border became now the crucial. In road transport, there is a possibility of special agreement, not signed, but greatly we had the interim agreement, temporary opening the market, and hopefully on that basis it can be further developed. Aviation transportation, we signed the treaty. Ira will talk more, and energy. Energy is probably our leaders. Gas market integration was basically done in 2020. Then Ukraine implemented the third package and actually became in the legal and functional framework of the European Union market. And in the war time, in emergency situation, EU agreed that Ukraine joined NTSOE faster. And now it works, and now the countries are expert in importing energy. And that was one of the caution pillars that helped Ukraine to understand that we will survive this winter despite the challenge. So basically not good, but still it's a lot of things still to do. What we expect in this year, we expect this and next year, still some sectoral integration, some roaming that was promised, hopefully ACA finally coming into force, mutual recognition of electronic trust services as a part of digital, hopefully some recognition of equivalence. So we are still in this sectoral dimension, but what we basically need, we need a much more coherent work with the EU on this sectoral integration in parallel with accession talks. We need to have a much more clear agenda with what we have to do to get this sectoral integration, because what we definitely don't want, we don't want this fatigue. We don't want to have a feeling that first we win the war and then we do legislation and then we see and then we move forward. That it never happens. Most likely the victory of the war that is in the meaning free in Ukrainian territory would not mean the security for Ukraine for a long time. And it means that as fast we are in the regional, in integration in the EU market, as fast we are in ensuring that the economy is developing strongly, fastly, with the private capital, mostly from EU and Ukrainian, as far as we have it, the better we are. Because Ukraine will, I just today saw, for example, that the estimated number of veterans and their families is 3 million. It's a huge number. It's Ukraine was about 40 million, 42 million, according to officials, before the war. But Ukraine already had a huge migration. Ukraine has losses, and it's not clear how good the estimates before the war. And we have occupation and etc. So the demographic crisis and the social obligations mean that Ukraine needs to go very fast in economic development. And reconstruction, building back better, building back greener, building in EU based on EU standards. I think that will be the motto of the reconstruction if we want to go fast. And for that, we need as deep sectoral integration, deep economic integration in EU as possible, even if the accession and the voting rights and the distribution of votes and veto it, etc. in EU will take some time to grasp how to be dealt with Ukraine in. A part of this sectoral integration, definitely it's a legal harmonization aiming now full alignment. Now we should be serious that we need full alignment now. We need strengthened institutional development of all relevant institutions, including integration itself. And I know that the governmental office is already working on that. Because this is a process that is challenging, it is challenging in a peacetime, and we will be working on that in the wartime and the post-war time, hopefully, sooner post-war time. Then restoring Ukraine's physical capacity, infrastructure. Some labs have been destroyed, many people left their homes, and including specialists needed for European integration. So we need basically train people, train as many people as we can, including all public servants, and we need to restore physical capacity to be able to serve all the things. And the restoration should not be like rebuilding as it was, but building on the EU standard. In short, technical elements, I was happy to read that while we are preparing this presentation, Ukraine is now Ukrainian is official language for translation in EU, not official, but these new. There is system of European translation in which Ukrainian is included. The transposition tables have to be included, and that has to be done transparently with regular, high frequency and clear communication what is happening. We should not allow Russia and others to intervene in our communication and spoil the messages. We have challenges for sure. That has to be clearly communicated as well as keep dialogue with stakeholders in EU and in Ukraine, and I hope this is one of the beginnings of this dialogue, and keep civil society involved. That is the part that helps us all to move fast. Thank you very much. I stop here and pass the floor to Ira.
So thank you, Magdalena. And thank you, Veronica. I'm sorry. And Irina, please take the floor is yours.
Thank you. I will be talking about sectoral integration and precisely about transportation and digital services. I have two major parts in my presentation: transport services, the state of its implementation and further steps, and digital services. I will briefly go over different transportation sectors and talk about what has been done and what is our path forward. But before I do that, I would like to mention that for all sectoral integration, it is very important not just to catch up where Ukraine is behind on the association agreement, but to catch up on the European legislation as a whole. Because when the association agreement was signed, that legislation is already out of date. There is already new legislation that Ukraine needs to implement to be part of the EU. So we not just need to do our homework, basically, but to do much more than that. So with transportation services, there is some legislative approximation has been done in the sector. And the association agreement, as Veronica has already said, it envisaged some signing special agreements in some sectors, and specifically in automotive, in railway, and inland water transport. Signing this agreement will provide the opportunity for Ukrainian companies to enter the common European market. In the international maritime sector, the association agreement granted already the internal EU market treatment subject on Ukraine's fulfilling its obligations. In the aviation sector, there was separate common aviation area agreement, which took a long time to be designed, discussed, and finally signed and ratified, but now the job is done mostly. The time frame written in the association agreement for these changes, it ranges, it's different for different sectors. The longest time frame was given for the railway sector, and was 8 years and 5 years for inland water transport. But Veronica has already mentioned all those dates already past due, so we are lagging behind. But we have some objective reasons. We have the war going on, but even before the war, we were lagging behind on some sectors. So we need not stop with this process and probably speed up that process. And I also wanted to mention that on the EU part, there was no timeline set in the association agreement, so there were no boundaries on how quickly the EU should react to Ukraine's result, how quickly it should confirm that Ukraine fulfilled its obligations. So talking about some specific sectors in air transportation, Ukraine and EU signed the agreement on common aviation area, and Ukraine adopted some very important secondary legislation like aviation rules and license conditions, but not all of it. there are still some gaps here, still some work to be done, for example, on providing free access to the market of ground handling services. And even though Ukraine and the EU signed that agreement on common aviation area, there are some further steps on how to make that agreement work. For example, a joint committee has to be established. Ukraine should become observer in European committees and associations like EASA. It would be really good if Ukraine can become also an observer in the One Sky Committee of the European Union. So there are some further steps. Once you meet some requirements, you can move further. So this is where Ukraine can move further in the air transportation. In maritime transportation, there are some laws adopted, very important laws on seaports and multimodal transportation, inland water transport, some secondary legislation, also very important. Ukraine acceded to conventions, international treaties on control and harmful anti-fouling systems on ships, on cargo mark, and Ukrainian ports are included in TEN-T maps, which is also very, very important because that would mean that the development of European transportation network would include Ukrainian ports, roads, railways, etc. But as in any other sector, there are some additional steps to be made. Talking about just the association agreement, no additional steps are required, because if Ukraine fulfills its obligations in maritime transportation, according to the agreement, it should get internal market treatment. But as I said in the start, there is new legislation already adopted in the EU, and Ukraine should adopt that also. Also, Ukraine should join some other international treaties, like conventions, for example, on ship, water ballast, on labor and maritime shipping, and others. And it would be really great if Ukrainian ports can be connected to the European maritime single window system and its safe CNET component. So still a lot of work before us, but a big part of work is already done. In internal waterways, Ukraine adopted a major law, framework law on inland water transport, and some other legislation, some secondary legislation. And also very important that the Danube River is included in the indicative maps of TEN-T. I mentioned it in other sectors. Ukrainian infrastructure and the Ukrainian transportation network becomes part of the general European network, and this is very important. What more can be done in this sector? Some other legislation, different sectors, upgrade of Ukrainian vessels in accordance with EU technical requirements. Why? Because if Ukrainian vessels meet those requirements, they will get the permission to use European internal waterways. And also Ukraine and the EU should sign a special agreement on conditions of mutual access to the market of inland waterway transport services. So it's not just technical requirement, but some other requirements as well, because in the EU, some aspects of internal waterways are decided not on the general EU level, but on the level of national governments. So probably a special agreement would be the best way to move forward here. In road transportation sector, Veronica already mentioned that there is an interim agreement, special agreement on the carriage of goods by road. Great step forward. Before the war, I personally never hoped that it would be signed so quickly, and I was greatly advocating in favor of it. So I'm really glad that it was signed, and I hope that it will be made permanent, not just a temporary solution. Also, Ukraine adopted some major legislation here, like the law on road transport, some rules on the transport of dangerous goods, etc. 10T also is very important, but there are some steps for the future, like getting constant access to the road transport market, adopting some more laws on safety of operations, and I already said that making this special agreement permanent would be a big step forward. In rail transportation, Ukraine adopted some legislation, some initial legislation on corporatization of Ukrzaliznytsia, on unbundling of Ukrzaliznytsia, and solved some issues of security management. But here, the volume of work that is still has to be done here, it's bigger than in other sectors. Ukraine still has to adopt the framework law on railway transport, some other legislation, some interoperability of railway systems and other sectors. Also, there is a big discussion on how to make private locomotives work on the state railway, how to design this mechanism. Then Ukraine should join the European Railway Agency after it does its homework. And other steps is accessing to the Treaty on the European Transport Society, and the final step, signing a special agreement similar to agreement in automotive transportation in the field of railway transport to gain mutual access to the railway market. Coming to digital services in the association agreement are covered in the telecommunications section. Here, the agreement envisages granting internal market treatment after Ukraine meets its obligations. That time framework was 4 years. They already passed. It was till the end of 2019. And the sectors that are mentioned in the agreement, computer services, telecommunication services, electronic commerce, information society, and audiovisual services. It's not, these are not all sectors that are mentioned, for example, in the EU digital single market, but it's some of them. So what has been done? Last year, Ukraine and the EU signed the agreement on Ukraine's participation in the Digital Europe program till 2027. And we are hoping that this year or the next year, Ukraine will sign an agreement on joint roaming with the EU. And I should mention that roaming was not initially part of the association agreement. So it's a new agreement, new negotiations. And also a mutual recognition of electronic trust services. We also hope that some agreement will be signed in coming years. The final goal for Ukraine is to be included into the digital single market strategy. And Ukraine has to catch up on some new legislation, which was adopted in the EU just last year, the new Digital Market Act. So again, we are not catching up just with the association agreement homework, but also with the new EU legislation. And this will be all for me. Thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much, Irina. Yeah, I have, before I will give you the floor, and I would like you, I just wonder how to gather questions. I will probably, okay, I will ask you to just to send your name to the chat if you have a question, and then I will give you the floor. And before we'll start the round of questions, I have just two or three remarks after listening to what you both say. Yeah, the integration. Okay, first, I really and deeply admired all the efforts Ukraine already did, especially in wartime, because we probably remember here in Poland, but also other European countries, that the process of the integration with the EU wasn't a piece of cake, even in the time of peace. And right now, in the time of war, it's a really great thing. Integration and the way the Ukraine is able to achieve goal after goal, I think it is symbolic in this wartime. And at the beginning of your presentation, Veronica, you mentioned that the integration with the EU became a thing for the Ukraine at the early 2000s. And I think it was clear for the most of us who when we were watching the events of the Orange Revolution and so on. And when we think about the EU integration, of course, I have in mind things as something we call the European perspective, and from one side, but also issues like the deadlines for the European perspective, and the issues like, for example, what we call the stage integration. So all the steps we make, and maybe also a kind of strategy some people believe might be a good solution for the EU, for the process of the EU integration. You mentioned also before, really, because before I will give a floor to our audience, something that is really important. It was at the very, very end of your presentation. It was that little passage about the necessity to involve civic society in the process, and to stay in an active dialogue, I believe, with the EU, with your partners, but also with the society as such, to give the society the chance to understand the meaning and the consequences of the integration with the EU. But those are my short remarks. I have a few more, but it's not my time to talk. So if we have questions from the audience, please just send me your name on chat, and I will give you the floor. Okay, so we have the first question. Okay, Zinovi, please. Okay, I will. Can I unmute you, or okay?
Yes, now it works. Thank you very much for this opportunity. I heard carefully, because we have some gaps in internet. I don't know why. This discussion reminds me the very famous novel of War and World, and the horrible changes what we have for today, since on one hand, for which country it was written and what this country doing now. On the other hand, I remember from this novel, one of the main ideas, the erste Kolonnenmarsch, the zweite Kolonnenmarsch, the dritte Kolonnenmarsch, in comparison with the reality of war and the crucial changes what we have for today. Practically, my question is concerned just demonstrated sectorial issues, for instance, for transportation, for energy, and for digitalization, because they became in parallel. I don't say that we should stop or change the main objectives which were shown in the association agreement and in discussion. We have something parallel reality for today for all these issues. For instance, I can give you the examples for transportation. This is the issue, for instance, that Jaspers now works on the Commission of the European Commission and the European Investment Bank for transformation of Ukrainian railway system into normal gauge 1435 millimeters, and now it's in very crucial discussion. Should be finalized the first feasibility study in June. For energy, we have the total reverse of some gas pipelines, which should now provide more equilibrated supply of this energy ware, as well as for electricity, just the same. And for digitalization, we have a very huge task how to use the new based on GIS systems, spatial planning technologies and exchange of geospatial information for reconstruction of those cities and destroyed regions of Ukraine. Therefore, in my opinion, we have find something new equilibrium with those tasks for a long time, and now they are stressed, foreseen by the previous agreement. But on my opinion, on this new status of Ukraine as a candidate country, together with Moldova, as a candidate, I suppose it will be soon more or less clear after Vilnius to NATO. And for instance, in such new for Europe mechanism of Three Seas initiative, how we can be, maybe it's unpredictable, but how we can be integrated into the next generation, and especially in the tools of just transition, because we have global crisis starting from environment, energy, food, security, economy, and so on. Maybe possible, it's not possible, available for the framework of such workshops and so on, but maybe it's possible to start with discussion how this new reality can be integrated with already achieved results of European integration of Ukraine, and then formulate more precise objectives for our collaboration. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Irina, Veronica, would you like to answer?
Yeah, would you like to start, or I can?
Yeah, yes, please. Oh,
Okay.
depends
And
on
then
you.
basically, I think that's exactly what I was talking about, that we have parallel process. And unfortunately, because of the war, because of the all other challenges that the world is facing, climate change, new technological developments, and we are moving in parallel. We are moving in parallel with association agreement, with accession, which is a standard process. Despite the new reality, we are ending up with actually very, very standard process of transposition of legislation. But also we have to find the answers to the question you posed, how to respond to new challenges, and how to find a balance with new tasks that were not written in any of these in any legislation prescriptive things. That's the life we will have. I don't know how to do it, but the only way I understand that we have no time to sequentially work on that.
Okay.
Yes, and I agree with Veronica, and I think that we can start here with first with assessing what is left to be done from association agreement, adding to that the additional legislation that Ukraine needs to adopt in order to align its legislation with the European one, and an additional part is how to what changes should be made to that legislation and to those agreements which were provoked by this war. So this like three-part accession, a very huge task, very difficult task, but that's our life now. Yes, it still has to be done.
Mm-hmm. Okay, do we have further questions? Mm-hmm. If so, just please raise your hand. Okay. Mm-hmm.
While people are still thinking, maybe I want also to respond to some of your comments actually about the stage accession, if I may.
Mm-hmm.
because it's one of the ideas that is now, and that is, I think, rightly ingraining in the European discussion, because we are now in the mixed audience, and in Ukraine, it's like a one-way path. This with some challenges, with probably some things that our European colleagues try to tell us, but we are focused on our urgent task, because for Ukraine, the European integration is not only the issue of choice, it's the issue of necessity and the issue of security. So that has to be understood. But in European Union, this is the question of enlargement, and the reason why it was no process of enlargement for a long time is a lot of like how the union per se is functioning, and how to ensure that it remains functionable after several more countries and large countries, especially a country like Ukraine, enters. And here this idea of Michael Emerson and the team. I'm proud that be a part of the team, but the idea is Michael's mostly is about the stage accession. There are several other ideas. The idea that we should not get like everything in the end. It should be integration, and if the country reaches certain level that can be verifiable, for example, through these European regular accession reports, if the country reaches certain level of preparedness and meets some certain political criteria, the country gets better access for decision making and to funds within the EU. That allows, in parallel with this sectoral integration we are discussing that the EU actually offers to many, we have these staged integration in the institutional EU framework that allows everybody to learn how to live together. And this is excellent, because actually the discussions in the EU, then they say that first let us clean our house and afterwards we will let you in, is in Ukraine perceived very nervously, because on the doors of our house, there was a crazy neighbor, and we want to build the wall and join the much larger, and we hope, thicker walls of the European house, feeling ourselves as a part of it. So, stage accession, yes, I fully support, and I'm happy that you also mentioned.
Yeah, I made that comment because I was a member of a group, ILF group, discussing the stage integration, the possibility of the stage integration, and the stage integration that would fit to each of the candidate countries. But now, Yulia, please, the floor is yours.
Hello, everyone. I'm really thankful for our speakers for this wonderful discussion and for their comprehensive presentation. As far as I am a part of the Team Europe initiative launched by the EU delegation to Ukraine, and actually I also cooperated with the Renaissance Foundation for a long time, but now I'm based in Germany temporarily as a visitor scholar for Center for Eastern European and International Studies. So if you let me, I would like to very briefly to share some observation as far as here I also involved broadly in the discussions which held in Berlin in Germany or in Munich in Bavaria. So there are at least two, I would say, arguments from the German side, from the side of German experts and policymakers about the EU enlargement, and especially regarding the Ukrainian part of this, because Moldova is obviously smaller and probably less strict about the EU perspective at this moment. So one is obviously political argument, which is kind of an elephant in the room, because obviously if the European enlargement will be fast, it will empower Eastern European bloc in policy making within European Union. So it is obviously that being a large country, together with Poland, together with Baltic states, probably together with Czech Republic and some other states, Ukraine will have a better voice, and this balance between old Europe and the newcomers to the EU will be kind of not so much in favor for Germany or France, for example. And the second argument, actually, it is economical one, because there in Ukraine, we have kind of a well-argued position that we will make our best input in European economy, because obviously Ukraine is a breadbasket for Europe, and we will be kind of great members regarding our agricultural export possibilities. But actually, regarding the fact that some of our Eastern European partners banned the export of Ukrainian agriculture production recently, it is also broad discussion in Germany, for example, whether the EU is ready to include Ukraine so much. Probably it's not a good fact that Ukraine is so powerful partner due to its agricultural possibilities, because now the EU co-sponsor or cover 40% of expenses for farmers in the EU. And previously it was actually 60%. So it is not so well communicated in Ukraine, but obviously we should provide to our partners kind of a broader, set of arguments why Ukraine is needed in Europe in sense of future policy making, and probably in sense of open single market accession. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
If I may respond, yeah, thank you very much for raising these issues. Extremely important. Several reflections. First, I'm afraid that being a weak partner would not help either. If you can look at Montenegro as a tiny country, definitely no threat to basically any economic powers in Europe, but no move either. I think that in the situation of agriculture in general, if we read Copenhagen criteria, for example, we see there that it's one of the criteria, market economy, that the country has to be able to withstand competitive market pressures of the union. And in principle, if we look at the declarative principle of the EU, it's a market economy. It's social, but it's still market economy. So what we see in Ukrainian grain exports and agricultural exports, basically Ukraine is competitive. Ukraine is not subsidizing its agriculture. Ukraine has big land. It has a different organization of the market, but it's really efficient, and it's getting more and more efficient with the process of technological advances of the sector. So the question is how to find a balance in this case, because it's indeed a threat for European farmers. And what we saw in Poland or Bulgaria now, we saw in a milder form for with Netherlands and others than we were exporting poultry, for example, which was not equally happily welcomed. But what can be done? First, definitely Ukraine. For grain, it's easier because basically Poland is not a primary destination for Ukraine. It's so huge demand outside Europe, the European continent. So it's just to ensure smooth transit, and it will work. But for poultry and others, it's definitely demand in Europe. So work with consumers on the one hand, think with European producers, what can be done jointly, so to balance. For you, it's fortunately, unfortunately, definitely bad news for Ukrainian farmers. I'm sure that by the time Ukraine joins the EU, common agricultural policy will be revised because it cannot survive Ukraine. And the pressure for changing common agricultural policy has been enormous for years. It's already evolving, and it's already moving to something like a green agricultural policy. Probably that's the solution, but still have to be thoughtful. So yes, we need to discuss these issues. We need to discuss things where there will be competitive pressures, as in transport, road. Ira did not mention it politely that we had a huge quarrels with Poland about quotas, permits for transportation. But there are things, and with Ukraine entering the market, there will be additional pressures because the economic structure of the market will rebalance. In some cases, Ukraine is not a price taker, it's a price maker. That has to be discussed jointly. By the way, we will have, today we have 24th, on 29th, we'll have another discussion on European integration, specifically about food and agriculture. So we will share it on our website and cordially invite everybody. It will be same time slot, but on Monday, for specific position on agriculture. It will be Ukrainian and Polish colleagues. So I think it can be used.
Thank you very much. Still a word from Irina or not?
I just wanted to confirm that, yes, there is still one more sector where Ukraine is very competitive, and this is automobile transportation. Ukraine has very competitive market, and there were some disputes with Polish drivers who are now, some of them asking to return the system of bilateral permits for cargo transportation by road. And yes, this raises issues on how EU is ready to compete with Ukraine, not just how Ukraine. Before the discussion within Ukraine was that the association agreement will allow European companies to come to the Ukrainian market, and the Ukrainian producers are not competitive. Now we see in some sectors reverse picture.
I think the crucial thing is to achieve the mutual understanding of all those issues, and to because right now, yeah, we have a really high, I would say, openness on the European citizen side. But on the other hand, as you all know, there are all those doubts, all those if, and the problems we need to solve. And this is also this part of the active, what we call the active dialogue. I believe an active dialogue on many multi-level active dialogue. So between, not only between politicians and economists and so on, but also on the level, I would say, at a this dialogue of citizens, also to get to know that we are not a threat for each other, but we are the chance for each other. I get an information about the time. So if you have no further questions, I will just say, and I don't see any more questions, and so I will close our today's discussion. And thank you for your presentations. Thank you for your questions, and I'm really excited, to be honest, to take part in another debates like this one, and to see another steps, and to see another chapters also close that will make Ukraine to be closer to the European Union and making another steps in the integration process. So thank you very much, and thank you for giving me a floor to moderate this discussion.
Thank you, Magdalena. It was great pleasure. to have your results, and thank you everybody who joined us. And let's continue discussion, because indeed we have to understand each other much better, be ready for integration.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.